But where I'd love to start, so my audience, like I'm one of those guys that kind of came to hunting later. So I kind of grew up in a bit of a hunting family, did a couple of moose hunts when I was 13 and 14, and then kind of had a falling out with my old man. Didn't talk for a long while, totally got away from hunting. And then in my early 30s, just kind of got super obsessed with it. I'm 45 now, so it's been about 10 years. And I find that a lot of people who listen to the podcast kind of that same like adult onset crowd. And I'm always fascinated with how people came into hunting. So where did you grow up, and tell us a little bit about how you were exposed to hunting? Like you come from a hunting family, I'm assuming?
Yeah, so it's actually, I do come from a hunting family. My dad was an outfitter when I was a kid. He was a cattle rancher and then seasonally an outfitter. And that was pretty normal back in like the 80s, 90s of outfitting. A lot of the folks that had grazing permits on wilderness areas or Forest Service areas, they also ran outfitting operations. So he was kind of part of that era where it wasn't his primary job, but it was a big part of it, or a part of it, particularly during the fall. The thing that's interesting, Jay, is that the people that know that background, they assume that I grew up hunting a lot with my dad. And the reality is I didn't. My dad, I think because it was part of his, work life, I don't think it was something that he really wanted to spend a lot of his free time, doing, even with me and my brothers. We actually did a whole lot more fishing. And I think we went on fishing trips, and I do give my dad a lot of credit on that front, man. Like we grew up, pretty darn poor, and he still, probably even when he couldn't afford it, he took us to Alaska. He took us on other fishing trips. So he exposed me to the outdoors in that way. But a lot of like on the hunting front, it was more like in this tangential way. I was always around it because it was a part of our life and it was part of his life. But it wasn't like he was taking me on, 5 hunts every fall. I would say it was probably the much less like that. It wasn't like that at all. I think in a sense that might have created like a little bit of interest on my part because I wasn't like forced into it, wasn't forced, into going on a bunch of hunts. And I actually remember like begging my dad to go on hunts, and just having like that perpetual, need to go, or at least I felt like I needed to go. So maybe somehow that like ember was kind of stoked by the fact that, I wasn't pushed into it. But once I was 12 or 13, and it's crazy because I've got kids, it sounds about the same age as yours. When I was that age, man, like I got 12, 13, 14, I used to hunt alone a lot, like all the time, which now I think about it, it's like wild to think about that. My parents would let me loose, man, for 4 or 5 hours a day and no cell phones, no nothing. You know what I mean?
Yep.
It's wild.
It's crazy, dude. I was just telling my wife the other day, it was come home when the streetlights came on.
Yeah.
Like they didn't even know where I was. You know what I mean? I remember one time I showed up at my grandparents' place like 20 kilometers away. And that was the one time where my mom was like, okay, whoa. Like that and we just rode on our bikes like down a highway, the whole and we never even questioned it. Yeah. And I think about my daughter now, and I get the heebie-jeebies when she wants to walk to the park half a block away by herself. I'm like standing out on the porch, like trying to give her some responsibility and show trust and faith, but at the same time being like, I live in downtown Vancouver. This is not, a great idea.
Yeah. It is a beautiful city, though. I think
we're lucky, man. Yeah, I love it here.
Cities. But no, I hear you, man. It's really, and I don't know what it is. Is it that the world is a more dangerous place? Or I think part of it, at least for my family when I was a kid, my parents really didn't have a ton of other choice. You know what I mean? Like they were busy. My parents worked hard all the time. And so I think that was a component of it too. I don't know, but I think about it in the same context of my own children a ton.
Yeah. It's so weird that this comes up, and I don't want to go off on too big of a tangent, but I've been dealing with like weird other parent drama lately. And I was like trying to remember, my mom never dealt with any of that. I don't remember her talking to any of my friends' parents. Like my relationships with my friends were my relationships. And I just went out the door and biked to whoever's house. And I think partly because the technological era, partly because maybe this like the illusion that we're not as safe as we used to be, these parents are like helicoptering in and like micromanaging. And I'm one of the ones that it's like, let's let them figure shit out on their own, and like
Yeah,
other
yeah.
parents. And I was like, it's funny, the thing about parenting is that of all the things I predicted would be challenging, none of those have come to fruition. And all the things that are hard about parenting are things I never expected to encounter, like
Yeah,
it's so
that's
weird.
funny.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Anyways,
no,
it's
I hear you.
definitely a different day and age now, man.
Yeah, yeah, no, no, I get it, dude. But yeah, that's kind of my long-winded how I got into hunting. I guess it was a self-inflicted obsession.
So where did you grow up?
So I kind of had an odd childhood. I grew up I grew up partly in Colorado, where I went back to in my mid to late 20s. I'm sure we'll get into that. And then I grew up in Northern California for part of it. I kind of had a back to the whole family deal. My father actually went back to veterinarian school as an adult, like in his 40s,
Wild.
and when I was a teenager. So that kind of split where we were living for a while, and then his career path kind of drug him around a little bit. So it was a mix of where we ended up. I mean, back to the like growing up thing. I didn't think it was normal, or I didn't think that was abnormal when I was a kid. Now that I'm, you know, rounding that corner to the age of my father when he totally changed career paths, I'm like, wow, that's kind of wild, But yeah, I had a mixed childhood in Colorado and Northern California.
Okay. So you tended to hunt by yourself a lot as a teenager. So I'm imagining, like, was school a big draw for you? Was it just something you had to get through? Like, was the outdoors always your driving passion?
Yeah, so it's like it's a question probably more based on like what part of my life we're talking about. I mean, and it's a good question, man, because I haven't really thought about it. And it's a weird one for me. Jay, I don't know if you know my background, but I went to undergrad, I went to business school, in the spectrum of this world, I guess people would call me like fairly highly educated. But I was always obsessed with hunting. And it's weird because growing up and hunting all the time, I knew it always rotated in my mind that I wanted to work in the hunting business. I wanted to be a guide. I didn't really think about like the financial component of it or anything like that. It was just like a dream. And for sure, part of that reflected off what I saw with my dad, right? As a kid, we always had pack horses. We always had pack mules. We got to do some pretty cool things in terms of that. And so I think I was always drawn to that throughout my childhood. But in terms of school was an important aspect of my life. Like my mother, you'd call her like a tiger mom, right? Like you weren't getting a B in school, period.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like it was so I would say that school was a priority, but I always thought I always dreamed of working in the outdoors, and I always kind of thought I was going to get back to it. I think I'd have to really flesh this one out, man, because it's not something I've thought about a whole lot lately. I think in some ways I got sidetracked a little bit, when I was in, 17, 18, 19, 20 years old. And part of that was that I was also from a family that, again, seems to be anomalous now, but when you turn 18, you weren't getting any money. Like
Right.
you're going to take care of your own shit when you turned 18. And so that became very relevant. And I think I say sidetrack, but it was probably a good sidetrack in my own mind. I, even as a young man, knew that I had to figure out how to make money so I could do all the things I wanted to do, have less stress in my life, take care of myself. It wasn't, I don't remember there being another option, to be honest with you. Like that's how I thought about it as a young kid. So I got, that was probably what drove me on the educational front. It's like, all right, I need to bang out all this so I have some earnings power. That's probably how I thought about it.
Okay, interesting. This is funny. This really resonates with me. So, earlier in life, I was a terrible student, like a high school dropout, didn't have a grade 12, went through a bunch of
Gotcha.
stuff, recovery, a whole bunch of stuff, went back to university later on. And then in my late 30s, went back to business school, got my MBA, the whole nine yards. So, in a very similar position to yourself, and the outdoors always resonated with me. I want to dive into that money thing a little bit, because this is something I don't see a lot of the younger people prioritizing. Like, I'm very fortunate, much like yourself. We get to spend a lot of time in the outdoors. I get to spend a lot of time hunting. And I think sometimes people look at that, and the whole Cam Hanes thing must be nice. And people are like, oh, it must have come to you, or this must have been given to you. But like, and I don't know who I credit with, because neither of my parents are particularly financially driven. Like, they've always done okay, but I wouldn't say it was like a hallmark of their personalities. But I had that same thing early on. It was like, maybe I knew I had a sense of independence. Like, I knew there was going to be a lot of stuff I wanted to do. And if I wanted to do that stuff, I was going to need money to do it. And there was kind of like two paths. You could go down the path of passion and maybe be broke and maybe not get as much freedom and financial stability, or you could go down this other path. And I do feel like I sacrificed a little bit earlier on in life, but now that I'm later on in life, I have a lot more freedom about what I get to do. And it's kind of funny. It's just something I don't see a lot of the younger people talking about. And maybe the social media thing, they see this facade of everybody doing what they love all the time. And I think one of the best ways to do that is like, figure out a really good way to make money, like something that aligns with you and resonate. Like, I'm not saying go sell your soul, but like, everybody has innate talents. Like, I look at what tradespeople are making. If I was to do it all over again, I think I just would have been an electrician. Like, you can subcontract, you could write your own hours. You're probably going to make 120 a year. You could take a couple months off in the fall. Like, and there's so many different opportunities like that. Anyways, I don't want to go on, but I really appreciate that you brought that up, because I do think it's getting lost a little bit these days, that if you want to do really cool shit in life, one of the things you should be spending some time thinking about is like, how you're going to bankroll all that cool shit.
Yeah. No, I think it's relevant, man. I would almost say that when I was a younger, kid, younger man, I had a chip on my shoulder about it. That's how I would describe it. Like, it was something that was important. It still is important to me. Like, I think about how I get to do a lot of fun things. Sounds like you do too, Jay, but I'm always cognizant of, how that affects my financial future too, so there's always this give and take around it. And I think you're probably right about social media. You don't see, I look at my Instagram. I don't post about, the fact that I'm, repainting the fixer-upper house I own in Puerto Rico, right? Everybody just knows that I have a second house in Puerto Rico and I live half the life. You don't realize that it's actually just like a dump that I fixed up. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, because I don't have interest in posting about it. I'm sure people don't have interest in seeing it, right? Yeah. So it's a part of my life that I don't post about. So you get a totally biased perspective if you see that. And I don't mean to contain it around my world, but just as an example, I think when you look at everybody, it's the same. That's the same thing. They're posting about spending the money, not making it for the most part, And man, I guided a lot of people in my life, and the majority of folks that were able to spend a lot of time in the outdoors of hunting, fishing, spearfishing, whatever, and become really competent at it, they tended to be folks that had that mindset. Somehow they had figured out along the way how to bankroll it. And contrary to what most people think, they weren't a bunch. The minority was people who were born with it.
Right.
Of the people that I guided who were spending, all the hunts they did a year, they spent $200,000, $300,000, $400,000 a year. There's lots of people like that. Yeah. Most of them were not born with money. They figured out some sort of other engine, to feed that.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so let's back up a little bit. So you were kind of focused on career, focused on money a little bit. When does guiding come into play? Is that something you were doing intermittently between other stuff, or did you get to a point and just decided to commit to it? How does that come in? Yeah.
So I have to give you like the long story, but I'll try to keep it brief.
It's all good.
So I went to undergrad. In undergrad, I studied computer science and economics. I went directly into finance for about a year. And then I went directly into business school. And then while I was in business school, I started a company with my brother. My brother still runs that company now. It's a financial business. I ran that with my brother for 3 years, or I think maybe 4.5 years.
Okay.
And then due to this was all during the first not the first financial crisis, but the housing financial crisis, right? So 2008 to 2011, or I guess by the time it all fleshed out, but during that period of time, so there was a lot of volatility. Like when I got out of school, being in finance was the equivalent of, like, it was laughable to go work for Facebook or go work for Google. Like going to the finance world was where it was at, right? So I went into that world, and then while I was in that world, it changed drastically. Me and my brother's business changed drastically. It survived, but there were some location issues. I was living in Dallas at the time. I didn't really want to live there anymore, and I didn't want to live in like an urban area on the East Coast, Manhattan or Philadelphia or something like that. So I sold my part of that business, and then so I was mid-20s or so, like going through like a mini, kind of mini retirement / figure things out sort of deal. And I had retained one of the clients during this deal, so that was kind of my day-to-day job. I was working remotely, and I went back to Colorado. My girlfriend at the time loved skiing. She's my wife now. We went back there, and really just to spend like 6 months. And I've always been a proponent of that to some extent. Right now, I'm doing that in my life. Like sometimes, like catching your breath to figure out your next step, I don't think is a bad idea. So we were kind of going through that process. The outfitting thing, I don't think the outfitting thing was really on my radar. To answer part of your question, is I had continued to guide and hunt through all of this time, even when it was irrational for me to do so. Right. And there's, well, I'll get into more, but anyways, we moved back to Colorado. Me and my wife were just enjoying ourselves skiing. And then I remember there had always been a set of permits that were adjacent to where my father operated when I was a kid. This is like 20 years prior, or it would have been, I don't know, 15 years prior, whatever. And there was a big set of permits that operated in the flat tops, outfitting permits, and everybody knew about them. When I was a kid, they were like the bee's knees. Those guys like had it going on. And it was a fairly scaled up business. Like it was like a legitimate business. A lot of outfitting businesses are really in a practical sense, you'd call them like a hobby business, but this was a real business when I was a kid. And it was always kind of like lingering in my mind. Hey, like I want to go up and like see what that world's like. I had been there when I was a kid. My dad knew the outfitters at the time. And I had heard that one of them had died at a fairly young age. So there'd been some turmoil. So me and my wife, we drove my Jeep up to where like the base station of that outfitting company was. And it was like mid-October, maybe like 20th of October. And it was a big snow year. And we drove up there. And I remember we got up there and we were driving in probably like 10 inches of snow. And we got to the pack station and I saw this old guy walking this mule down the switchbacks. And it was the trail that went into the Flat Tops Wilderness. And I drove up to him. And I could just tell he was in like, not enjoying himself, and the mule was lame. And he introduced himself as Jim, and he had bought this business over time, but was kind of running it in the interim. And I was like, hey, you ever think about selling this thing? And he looked at me and he's like, you better effing believe it. And within 2 weeks, I bought it from him. So I wasn't looking for one, but it kind of fell into my lap. And when it fell into my lap, I didn't view it as a full-time career at all. I had a lot of other ideas in the back of my head, but I knew the potential of it because I had seen it at its top, and I had seen it now, which was basically non-existent. They were doing like 4 or 5 hunts. And so I knew that there was potential there, but I thought it was going to be like a hobby, business turnaround. And then within 18 months, it became my full-time job, and I just progressively built it up, and it was an adventure. So I was in and out of different worlds, man, over those years. But that's the long story about how I got back into it. And one thing I did want to mention that's really relevant, if anybody is like dreaming of this world. I had a really in-depth livestock background as a kid. We always had horses and mules. And these businesses, or a lot of these businesses that operate in these wilderness areas, are really heavy on the horse and mule front. And I was lucky because it was always a part of my family. Like, I don't remember a time in my life that my family didn't have 15, 20 horses, right? If not 50. So that was something that was like, I had that ingrained skill set. Even, I mean, it's for a guy who's like, working on like, quote, Wall Street or whatever. Nobody there knew that like I had saddled thousands of mules in my life or whatever, but it was a skill set that I had. And if it weren't for that, I would have never got back into outfitting.
Okay. Yeah. That
long answer, man.
Give me an idea of scale. Like when you were ramped up at the end, maybe it wasn't. Okay. So we had 4 or 5 hunts per year when you bought it. At your peak, how many clients, on average would you be running through?
So so that business was primarily mule deer and elk, wilderness hunts, all packing stuff. And then I progressively got into other aspects of outfitting. I had some ranches leased. I did a bunch of booking stuff in British Columbia for guys at Spring Bear. But probably like in terms of outside of the booking deal, I was doing at the peak like 250 hunts a year.
Wow.
Something in that realm, maybe a little bit more at the highest year.
I'd like to hear your opinion on this because like my day job is I'm a business consultant. I have a kind of behavioral insights consulting firm, and I deal with a lot of like kind of big companies, strategic advice, all that 9 yards. There seems to be a gap. Again, I found it interesting that you said most guys were approaching outfitting business as more of a hobby, because I've got some good buddies who are outfitters and I see things. Most outfitters don't seem to be approaching from like a tactical, strategic business perspective. Like there seems to be some pretty low hanging fruit in the outfitting realm. Now you're obviously much more exposed to it than I am. What's your take on that?
Yeah, so I'd love to hear, the specific ones. I can tell you, I have some general observations about outfitting from being in the business for a big chunk of my adult life. One of the challenges with the business is just getting to critical mass, right? And they're all, outfitting is so fragmented and then it's so different, right? A guy who's got a couple ranches leased and they hunt via four-wheelers or trucks or whatever, that's going to be a whole lot different than a guy who's running a pack string, out of north of Prince George or something, right? Like way up in, on the Yukon border. These are like totally different businesses. But in general, one of the big issues that they have is just reaching critical mass where all their fixed cost and all of that is covered, and they enter kind of a world of actually being a real business. You know what I mean? That's the biggest challenge that I think. There are folks just like in any other business that are, have rolled some up, have got scale that way, but that's generally the biggest issue. But tell me, I want to know, like bounce off some of your observations and then I can comment on them.
So this is interesting, and I'm going to back it out to the hunting industry as a whole, because like some of my big clients are like Adidas, Lululemon, Arc'teryx. Sure. And when I see, and I have some relationships with some of the big hunting brands, like Sitka, Stone Glacier, some of these guys. And I feel like as a general rule, the hunting industry is running about 5 to 10 years behind other comparable industries. Like if we were going to go retail apparel, so we could like compare Sitka against Lululemon. When we look at the way Lululemon is approaching like the customer experience journey compared to how a company like Sitka approaches the customer experience journey, I would say by and large, and Sitka was probably one of the better examples, but by and large, they're about 5 to 10 years behind in their appreciation of consumer psychology, in their kind of approach to marketing. And I've always tried, and it's the same thing I see with outfitters. Like I deal with some small businesses in my consulting firm, and they seem to have a better grasp of like the nuts and bolts. And here's the problem with small businesses. People get into small businesses because they were in love with whatever that business did. It didn't mean they were in love with business. And when you get into like Fortune 500 companies, these are people who are in love with business. And to be honest,
sure.
don't really give a shit what widget is coming out the other end. Their whole day revolves around optimizing the systems that those
their
widgets.
passion. Their passion is business.
Yeah, growing,
Yeah.
scaling, selling, exiting, that whole 9 yards. And I'm trying to think of like, so on the industry front, it's the customer experience journey, it's the marketing, it's even the lack of storytelling as far as like building customer relationships that we see. Product, even like the product launches, like when you go to a hunting brand website compared to when you go to one of these other apparel retail. And the question that always comes up for me now, is it just a matter of money? Because obviously the bigger a company gets, the more money they've got to spend on this. And I understand when margins are tight, it's normally the frilly stuff that tends to go first. So that is one possibility. But I'm also it might not be attracting the real star players because it's not big and sexy and multi-billion dollar. When you're talking about like really bringing in creative talent, or from a business perspective, bringing in people at the C-suite level, maybe they just don't have those particular staff. So I've always been, and it's funny that I've never actually tried to sell to hunting companies by and large. And I'm actually exiting that other business, so it's not something that I'm concerned with now. But that's very interesting. But even on the Dustin Rowe is a good example. Do you know Dustin?
I don't know him personally, but
I don't know him personally
I know
either. I'm kind of examining it from afar.
Yep.
But what he's been able to do, so he had Backcountry BC and beyond, and now he has the Caesar Lake.
Yep.
I think he ran through about 110, 120 clients this year. And up there, when you're talking stone sheep and stuff, like his top line he's probably one of the bigger guys in BC now. But he did this amazing thing with Nick Marciondo, where he had him come in for a couple years and they would like document all these stories. And after the season was over, you would get these like beautiful cinematography, kind of short, easy to digest, like 10 to 12 minute kind of things. He partnered with like Sitka and One Shot Gear on all this stuff. And the narrative, or like the story that imbibed into his organization. And I guarantee a lot of his hunts after he started doing that stuff were from people who wanted to belong to that narrative. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And other than posting some grip and grins, from the marketing perspective, outfitters don't really seem to be optimized or doing things that I would consider in line with the sophistication that you would see from other companies. So that would be one of the examples I'd see from my end.
So the way I think about it is there's kind of, when people say the hunting industry, in my mind, like the operating outfitters and then the gear companies, there's like pretty darn different. But,
I would agree.
But you hit a point that is universal, I think, historically to both, and that's just being undercapitalized.
Right.
I remember when I was, we're not talking that long ago, like, pre Jason Harrison kind of days, nobody had money. Like Mossy Oak had money. Like they had some capitalization and they were like in that world, but no other hunting company was well capitalized, including British Columbia's Northern Outfitters. Like that world drastically changed. I spent a fair amount of time. There was a bunch. You're probably way more familiar with it than I am at this point, but I looked at a ton of outfitting businesses in British Columbia as I was trying to expand my business.
Right.
And there's a bunch of things that I'd have to deal with given that I'm not a Canadian citizen. But during that period of time when I was looking, it became very apparent that the whole world of how these things were capitalized was on the cusp of drastically changing, or it already was. There's there's money coming in from hunters who like to hunt. There's a whole
100%.
different way things were capitalized. But I think the gear companies were the same way, Jay. People don't realize like these guys have access to I mean, a lot now when you look at the majority of these outdoor gear companies, there's private equity funding in the majority of them.
Yep.
You know what I mean? So I think that has simulated the change. But to your point, most companies have been doing that for like 40 years.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So I don't know what the stimulus was for all of a sudden there to be this interest, but I can tell you that at least in the last like 5-6 years, there's been an influx of that, and then it is changing. But I don't know what the delay is, because just more on like a practical little small outfitting business front. When I started in the outfitting business, I mean, 30% of guys didn't even have a website.
Yeah.
And we're talking, that was not that long ago, man. We're talking like before 2000, between 2000 and 2010, everybody got websites, but the outfitters for the most part didn't when I started. So when I started, it was like the same thing. You could just look at what other businesses had done 5-10 years ago. And if you did that, you would kill it. Yep. Like if you just did basic things like, basic SEO things, right? You wrote some articles about elk hunting, you wrote some articles about mule deer hunting. Within 2 months, you would be on the top of Google. And for other industries, that was unheard of. Like that was stuff they were doing 5 years ago or more. So I don't know why that lag is. I'm guessing I can tell you for sure, and it probably goes for the gear companies too, but in the operating outfitting world, it for sure comes from the fact that a lot of people have fallen in love with the hunting and the adventure part of it, and not the business part of it. And unfortunately, I feel like it might be part of the stall in the whole industry as a whole. I think that a lot of people really they get into the business, and then after 5-6 years, they hate it. If you really talk to them in private conversations, they hate it. And it's because there's constant stress about money. Yeah. It's not a good business at all, but they feel a need to continue doing it for whatever reason. So
what do you think?
It's tricky.
What do you think okay, 2 questions.
Yep.
Do you think current prices in general for outfitting are realistic? Like, can people survive off of these prices? Let's talk about that for a second, because when I hear they don't have money, it's like it's either a top line thing or a bottom line thing. There's either not enough coming in the top, or there's too much going out the bottom, and both of those can be addressed. Some of them are harder to address than others. But do you think rates these days are reasonable?
For outfitting services?
Yeah.
I think it depends a little bit. I think it depends a little bit on the type of hunt. I think that to your point of why people struggle, most people struggle because of lack of scale.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So like a guy like Dustin, as an example that you brought up, those hunts, they're very high ticket items, right? So he gets some scale in just the fact that they're, a stone sheep hunt is, 60-70 grand or whatever it is. I don't keep track of it, but he still has a lot of cost in that. You know what I mean? Like there's a lot of cost in those hunts. But if you take an elk hunt if you take a wilderness elk hunt that has, very similar cost structure, but it's 1/5 the price tag, your margins are way thinner. And what that means is if you're going to operate in that business, you have to have a certain amount of scale. And a lot of it is livestock related. It doesn't matter, when I was operating, if I did 50 hunts or I did 200 hunts, I still needed 35 horses at a minimum, and I had to feed them year round. So I think the pricing is probably, it should probably be I always thought about like this. It should probably be, the equilibrium should probably be higher than what it is. I knew a lot of outfitters, or I knew some personally, and I knew of some that operated at a loss because it was like their way to go hunting, or I don't know what the deal was, to be honest with you. It kind of drove me crazy when I was in the business. Like, you're competing at people that are willing to tolerate zero margin. Yes. So that compresses your pricing for sure. So I would guess if you took that out, pricing would be a little bit better. But I think the other thing is just, guys, if you're going to be in the business, you have to get bigger. just to cover your fixed costs, and then it's fine. You can make a living. It's hard work, as anything is,
Yeah. No, in consulting, we call it the valley of death. And I think you're 100% right. There's this, like, you either stay super small shop, 1 or 2 guys, billable hours, low overhead, or you get to the point where you got 10 or 20 people crushing hours and you can afford the office. But like getting from here to here and going through that valley where your overhead skyrockets before your top line comes up to meet it is the valley of death. And that's where, 50% of people die. And not to kind of bring Dustin up again, but a lot of his, and I love the term fixed costs because a lot of the stuff he's got, his horses, a lot of the equipment, like the trail, like all this stuff now that he's got 2, I'm sure he had to get some more stuff, but he's going to get double usage out of a lot of his stuff. So his fixed costs are not going to elevate, but his top line is now that he's got this second thing.
Oh yeah, just scaling up in the business.
Oh yeah.
I think this is some of your audience might find this interesting because they may be part of it or they may realize it doesn't exist. One thing that's very unique in the outfitting or somewhat unique in the outfitting business is there's a stigma about getting big.
Right.
For sure.
Like I totally get that. Yep.
And that's I'm any outfitter who grows, believe me, there is a stigma that comes from other outfitters. If you're involved in anything public land oriented, there's going to be a stigma because there's no getting around the fact that it's at least perceived that you're competing with the public, right? For a limited resource. I always viewed it, at least in the outfitting in the States, I was really a service provider. None of the stuff I did, I had control of tags or anything. So it's a little bit different that way. But regardless of all that, there's a stigma about getting big internally within the industry and externally. And I think a lot of people in the business have to deal with that. And it's a hard one for people to get their mind around,
Well, look at how people like these big gigantic ones. Like I think of like A3 and what's the other one? Is it Mossback?
Yeah,
like
Mossback.
The really big guys who have 30 guys out pre-scouting. Like if you look at the chatter online, like those are not popular organizations. Yeah. Like as a general rule, like the general public are not fans of those guys, and it's kind of funny. There's a really interesting conversation to have.
But what's crazy, Jay, is you kind of see it with the gear companies too,
right?
For sure. As they get big in hunting, it's like, this company is ruining hunting or that company is ruining hunting. I think it's fairly unique to hunting. Maybe you can comment on it because you're exposed to a lot of other industries. I don't see a lot of other industries where even the consumer is so concerned about the company getting bigger. Maybe in the food business, there's this preference towards like small, like farmers market type of stuff, but I don't see it as common in other industries.
I think it's actually a deeper psychological bias in that human beings prefer the underdog and you root for somebody, but then once they get to a certain level, we love to see people crash and burn. And we see it in our sports teams. We can see it in our businesses. It was very interesting coming from Vancouver and watching the escalation of Lululemon. Like my wife can remember going to it was a yoga studio or was it a hair salon? I think it was a hair salon down on 4th and Kitts where Lululemon rented the top floor. And it was like nothing but like 4 racks with like black tights on it. And that was it. To go from that to what it is now and watching, like people here hate Chip Wilson. Watching the sentiment because like, oh, this is our baby and it's from Vancouver and oh, look, now it's growing. And then it turns into this behemoth and the general, I wouldn't say the general sentiment is negative because I think Lululemon does a very good job of, obviously they're a little woke for my taste, but they do a pretty good job of perception management. But I don't think it's necessarily unique to hunting. What I think is unique to hunting is that if you did like a distribution of the size of the businesses, both in the apparel and the outfitting side, I bet you we are predominantly small. So there's lots of underdogs to root for. And then like you watch this happen with Stone Glacier, like people would have slit their own throat for Stone Glacier. And then now Stone Glacier's got bought out. Like that's not Stone, like they're just part of a PE company somewhere with 25 different brands. And Kurt's still designing it. I don't want to take anything away from their gear, but if you thought that this was like some tiny little company and you're part of a tribe and you're supporting them and like give your head a shake, man. Like this is just another,
Yeah,
asset on somebody else's financial sheet that's just cranking out clothes to sell. No one who actually owns that asset gives a shit about. I don't know, maybe I'm being a little bit harsh, but it's no different than any other business now. It's shifted away from like that path. I watched the same thing happen with First Light, and I don't want to like throw them under the bus, but I was a big First Light guy. I watched them get really big. I watched them got bought out. I watched some of the quality issues. I think that's the other interesting thing about hunting that we see is that I have yet, Sitka does a pretty good job, but a lot of these companies, the bigger they get, and this would be interesting to hear from the outfitter's perspective, getting to critical mass is one thing. Maintaining the quality of experience at critical mass is a completely different thing.
yeah,
I'll kind of throw Kafaru under the bus here. I was a big Kafaru guy. I run EXO now for Pack, but that's just a matter of personal preference. But the amount of people who have DM'd me, so I do gear reviews. That's kind of where I got my thing.
yeah. Sure, I saw. Yeah, I see.
Yeah,
On your
the
Instagram
amount of
stuff.
people who have DM'd me about QC issues with the new Kafaru Bino packs, like labels are askew and like threads
Yeah.
are missing. And it's like, what happened to Kafaru the last 3-4 years? They doubled or tripled in size. They moved. What happens? You start ramping up quality like that, production like that. The real talent is being able to maintain the quality of production, or if you're an outfitter, the quality of hunt experience while if you're going to one of these big lodges with 40, 50 dudes in it, that's not the same thing as sleeping in a wall tent with 4 dudes in the flat tops.
Yeah. No, it's the hardest part about scaling it, right? I mean, you can go out and go out. I mean, there's a bunch of people who sell you outfitting businesses. You can buy them all over all over the country and all over the world if you want. But the problem is that you have 2 problems. One, if you grow individual locations, it doesn't like your fish and game regulations and all of that. They're always going to be behind the biological reality. So if you hunt the crap out of an area, you're going to affect the hunting directly because of that, right? So you have that issue, and then you have just like like you're saying, just a big lodge, more people, all of that. But the biggest issue I think outfitters, operating outfitters have is that they have a core crew that's really good. And when I sold my business, I like the people that I sold my business to, I told them my biggest asset was my crew. I had a phenomenal crew. And, the core crew of like 5-6 guys, small group, was worth a lot in that business. And because a lot of people in the outfitting world, they may have one guy or they may be the only guy. And so the problem is, as you scale, to some extent, you can take those individuals, you can put them different places, but you have to have a way of creating new talent. So when you get a new location or, whatever you're doing, that the quality goes with it. That's the hardest part of the whole thing.
That's
so
interesting.
It's a lot of the same issue you're talking about.
I don't want to harp on this issue for too long, even though I'm like super fascinated by it. So I want to take a bit of a left turn here. I want to talk about mindset, and I want to give some context to this next question. So to use kind of Cody Rich's framework, I feel like I'm in that transition from 101 to 201. Like, let's say a 101 hunter is that guy who's able to get out a couple times a year, put down an animal or 2 a year, and delete, like, let's be honest about it. There's like a lot of luck involved, but it's also like if I'm out there long enough, stuff will happen. And then there's this kind of 201 hunter who like is not counting on luck anymore and is the kind of person who can go out there and fill the freezer every year. And that was my ultimate. Funny, when I got into hunting, like trophy size wasn't even an issue, because when you're outside of the hunting world, you don't even understand that the size of antlers would really matter. My biggest goal was like consistency. Like that's what I viewed as a metric of success. Like you can go out every fall and bring an animal home. And I feel like I'm getting to that. I still have lots of stuff to work on, but I'm routinely successful now. But I'm curious what your learnings have been about the differences in mindset between the people who luck out every now and then and those people who like success is more of a foregone conclusion. Like they've got that eerie level of confidence and they seem to produce year after year. And maybe I'm out of whack. Maybe it's not all mindset. Maybe there's other characteristics there that play into it more, but I'd love to hear your kind of perception of some of the differences in character between those two groups of people and what are some of the things we could work on as people moving from one group up into the other.
Yeah, so I think probably like the starkest thing that I saw from like a third party perspective, there was a part of when I was a period of time when I was outfitting, because I had so many hunts, I didn't spend that much time guiding anymore. I spent very little, but I saw all the results, right? And all the clients, and I saw all the guides who were helping the clients. And so one thing I observed is that it really doesn't have anything to do with hunting, but it's more of a comfort level in that environment, right? So, and it sounds kind of woo woo, but a lot of people, it takes them years to be comfortable in the mountains or wherever you're hunting, just being away from home. Yeah. You know, grown men in their 40s, if they haven't done it a whole lot, and it could also be like practical things, right? If they have, drama at home or whatever, they're never comfortable in the field, right? And to me, that's one of the biggest defining differences between individuals that are successful and not. I mean, I had clients that came, I had a lot of repeat clients that came 4, 5, 6, 10 years straight. And I had some individuals who spent a lot of money hunting, spent a lot of time in the field, but every time they came and hunted, they were uncomfortable. They just they weren't comfortable being there. On the practical side of things, if we were wall tent hunting, 3-4 miles or 3-4 hours into the wilderness, they just couldn't they couldn't sleep well. They were always cold. All these things that are not directly hunting related played into the fact that they were just never at home, at least in our environment, the mountains, right? And I think it applies to any type of hunting, including being in a lodge in Texas or whatever. A lot of people go there, they've been thinking about this hunt for months and months and months, and then they get there and they're not comfortable in that environment, and that makes it so they can't really focus on hunting. And I think the bigger thing is, in terms of over time, if you're always like that and you're not in kind of that moment, to be cliche about it, and able to be in the moment, you can't iterate on it. You can't learn anything, right? It's like, right. I've guided individuals. I guide them on a sheep hunt. They shoot the ram, and before we're at the ram, they've got a cell phone out and they're changing their flight, right? Yeah. In my mind, I'm thinking, I hope this individual had a great time. It was a fun hunt. Everything was provided correctly. It's a win, but I realized that during the last 3 or 4 days, he's had no interest in becoming a better hunter or a better sheep hunter or whatever. You know what I mean? Yeah. I see that a lot. And what's interesting, or one of the most interesting things I think about hunting, and when I look at people who hunt for, over the years, is like seniority or the time you've spent hunting. It's not as correlated as people think. Okay. I think that I know like a good, actual like solid example is there are individuals that came and started guiding for me, and maybe they had hunted elk a little bit, like maybe a couple years, right? A guy's 21, 22 years old. He's hunted with his family a couple years, and he comes and spends 2 seasons guiding, right? And he becomes comfortable in the mountains, and he iterates on the hunting, like in a real short temporal time, right? Goes elk hunting, has a day off, goes elk hunting, yes. That sort of thing. That guy, I hate to say it because people will be offended by it, but he will out hunt a lot of people who have been elk hunting for 35 years. Yep. And so that's when I try to analyze that, what a big portion of that is getting comfort in the environment. And just to bring it back to what we talked about, I guess even before we started the podcast, it's like spearfishing. If you're not comfortable in the water, good luck. like good luck trying to, learn something about fish behavior or, how to line up, your spear gun with the fish. None of that matters if you're not comfortable in the environment. So that's one of the biggest factors, I think.
Dude, this is gold. And if anybody's like newer, go rewind 10 minutes and listen to that again. I think so many people, as you're talking, I'm thinking so many people are putting the cart before the horse. My thing is like solo hunting. I'm very lucky. I live in British Columbia. I get to go chase stones every
Sure.
year and do all this stuff. And everybody's always wants to know about solo hunting and how to do it and all this kind of stuff. And I'm always trying to tell people, it's not your boots and your tent that are going to send you home. It's your mind.
Oh yeah.
Because,
Yeah.
dude, you will start fixating on some girlfriend you broke up with in high school. And I think solo hunting exacerbates this, but I think it's
Sure.
still present in all of the other types of
Oh,
hunting.
yeah.
I was very fortunate. I was a forestry engineer in my previous life.
Yeah.
So I spent 15 years walking around the mountains of British Columbia by myself. Get out of a truck
Yeah.
at 7 a.m., go back to the truck at 5 p.m. And it rained, snow, shine, did not matter. And then so I started doing these crazy backcountry hunts 2-3 years deep. And everybody's like, you're going to die. And I'm like, that's home. Here,
Yeah, you're used
I don't
to
know
it.
what to
Yeah,
do.
yeah.
I don't know how to talk to people. I don't know how to be with people.
Yeah, yeah.
But like out there, I'm quiet inside and outside. And it's like, that's what I try and tell people. And the iteration thing too, like I think about that. So many people hit me up and they've got the one big hunt a year.
Sure.
And I'm like, dude, it's going to take you 10 years to put together the reps that a guide gets in one season. And yet you're comparing yourself to that other guide. So it's either you got to cut yourself some slack and recognize that it's just going to take
Sure.
you a lot longer to get where you thought you were going to get, or you got to find other ways. Maybe that's preseason scouting. Maybe it's taking your kids on camping trips. I don't know, doing whatever it is you got to do to facilitate a similar environment so that you can, because I see it all the time. People can't check out. Like they go on a 7-day hunt. They're stressed about everything at home until day 3. They might chill out for day 4. And then by day 5, they're stressed about everything going back. And it was like, you were never even here, man. Like you were here in body, but you were never here in mind.
Yeah. 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 Well, it's so true, man. And you came into it with an advantage that you acknowledge and you recognize. A lot of people don't recognize that. The perfect example, man, I've had people call me who are like past vegans or, they used to work for the Forest Service and had no interest in hunting, but they listened to Joe Rogan and now they want to go hunting. And like, a lot of hunters would be like, well, that guy's not going to be any good at it because he's never shot a gun. His parents didn't let him, have a gun when he was a kid or whatever. Well, when you get those people who are they're just used to like crashing in their backpack tent. They're used to just walking around the woods. They're okay in the dark. Like a lot of grown men who are 50 years old cannot hike in the mountains in the dark. And I understand it. I'm not trying to pick on people, but you have to acknowledge that if you can do that, it's a massive advantage. So like even on the iteration thing, Jay, I think people take offense to that because it's it's impractical, right? Like I can tell you, hey, you want to become a good elk hunter, go elk hunting for 40 days straight. Well, that's just like, that's not fair for me to be the advice. Right. But what about the fact that like you're going to go on American's going to spend 80 grand to go on a stone sheep hunt or, they're going to go on a 10-day stone sheep hunt out of their backpack and they haven't ever slept in their backpack tent. They haven't iterated on setting it up, sleeping in it. Oh, like last night I didn't sleep at all because, I didn't have it flat or I had it angled down. Like I got to make sure I don't do that. Like those are things you can iterate on in other ways that take less resources, less time. And in a lot of ways, they're just as important as shooting your rifle or whatever else,
Oh, 100%. The amount of messages I get about sleeping alone in the backcountry.
Oh,
and I try and empathize, but I don't even remember. And I'm like, I guess there maybe was a point, but I sleep like a baby.
Yeah.
Like I pass out as soon as my head hits the pillow, but I'm like, I guess there was a time when like my mind was playing tricks on me and I'd hear a raccoon and think it was a bear. And it was like, but I mean, it's like, go sleep in your backyard, man. Cause you will be surprised how you're going to feel just as freaked out back there as you do up there. But like the risk is much lower and you can like build up those tolerances. I love that because I like giving people kind of tactical things that they can do that's actually going to change their likelihood of success. And like you say, it's not realistic for people to go spend 40 days hunting a year. I push back at that a little bit. Depending on what your goal, you got to decide like where this sits for you. Like if this is your thing and this is your ultimate passion, it's like, just work a little bit harder, bro. You can get some more vacation time. Buy the wife a purse. She's going to be fine if you take off for another week. Like there's ways to get it done, but I get it for most people. That's not realistic.
Yeah, but you're hitting on a point, Jay, that I think is relevant, is that it just depends on how serious you're going to take it. Right. And some people take these things, maybe too serious. I mean, they're like 80% of the reason that I am sitting where I am right now is this spearfishing obsession. Right. So it's like, is it healthy for, to change your whole lifestyle so you can go iterate on elk hunting over and over? For some people, it probably is. For some people, it may not be. I don't know.
Dude, I nuked my whole life.
Works.
I had a successful consulting, and it's all like but here's the difference. I think there's like a realistic and an unrealistic way to do things. And again, going back to this awareness of the need for financial resources. I knew for my first backcountry hunt, I'm like, oh, I'm done. I'd done CrossFit, I'd done jujitsu, I'd done all those like man things. I'd done engineering for 15 years. And I'd done all those things to find myself. And I did one backcountry hunt and I was like, I'm done. This is the thing I'm going to do for the rest of my life. And ever since that day, it's like, okay, well, how do I facilitate that? Because I don't have $1 billion to quit my job and just hunt all the time. I have a young child and a wife at home. I can't take off and guide for 3 months of the year. Like all the traditional routes were not available to me. And luckily enough, I'm pretty creative, pretty smart. I figured out another way to like get it done. But I mean, it happens. You get that level of obsession. And I think the trick is, a boss said something really smart to me one time. I ended up quitting with like zero notice, had like $70 in the bank, hated my job. And the boss was like a bit of a mentor. And he said to me, he's like, you can either happen to life or life can either happen to you. And he goes, in this situation, you let life happen to you. You stayed here until you couldn't take it anymore. And I get it. You're leaving. That's fine. No hard feelings. But you're leaving here with no resources. And now you're just, whatever's going to happen to you next is going to happen to you because you don't have the ability to make whatever you want happen. And ever since that, I was like, anytime I felt myself getting close to a transition, it's like, how do I get on top of this? How do I make sure that this is my plan that's being executed and not just life happening to me? And I kind of felt that way with hunting. It's like, I'm either going to go broke and quit my job and my wife's going to leave me and I'm going to go live in a tent on the mountains, or I'm going to figure out a way to actually make a couple bucks doing this thing and get to spend, my life doing it. So that raises a very interesting question because people are going to be furious with me because we're not getting to any of the Q&A, but whatever. Hopefully you'll agree to a round 2 in a few months and we can address those. But
no problem, man.
One of the common threads is sponsorship. So I've kind of made my mark as being an unsponsored guy, doing unbiased, non-sponsored gear reviews for a variety of reasons. Yep. But you're another one of these guys, and I think it's, it's because you're not financially beholden. You decided to go make your income throughout another stream. But just in general, I'd like to, and it could be positive or negative or both. How do you feel about where we're at in the hunting industry in regards to sponsorships? And maybe how should these younger guys be looking at that? Like, is it an acceptable route? Is it not? Is there certain qualifications to it being acceptable? But just in general, I'd love to hear your feedback on kind of sponsorships in the hunting industry right now.
Yeah. So I guess the first thing I would say is it's like something I'm still developing my view on it. Most my life in the hunting world, it's been pretty simple because as somebody who's, an outfitter, you're operating out in the field, gear is pretty cut and dry, right? You people can send you all sorts of piles of shit. And if it doesn't work, you're not going to recommend it because you have to deal with the direct feedback, right? So it's not like in that world, it's easy. It's like, yeah, you want to send me free stuff, whatever, go for it. Like, I don't, I'll try it. I'm not going to refuse free stuff. And then it gets used and it doesn't work or it does. So in that world, it was so simple. But now that I've moved into a world where I have this social media presence on my YouTube or whatever, it constantly comes up and kind of like segueing back to the last topic we discussed, it's very relevant because what we just talked about, like this iteration, having time in the field and trying to figure out a way to get better at this skill set, that's hard to do. So what I find, it's hard to do for a bunch of reasons, right? Just getting the resources, time, planning, whatever. It's kind of like the long play. You got to put in the effort. What I find is a lot of people fall back on like click, 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 let's buy some more shit. Yeah. You know what I mean? And this is it. And I'm not saying that gear has not drastically improved, but I'm saying at some point, the marginal return of just like spending all your time, I call it gear baiting because that's what it seems like to me. Is just like this obsessive behavior with gear. Like people just buy new gear every year and that's like their hobby instead of hunting. So there's friction with like the social media stuff because people like the gear related content, but I don't want to tell people to buy things that have no marginal return in terms of them getting better at this, right? And I don't want to stimulate the idea that that 80% of hunting is just picking the right gear. So I've purposely avoided all the sponsorship stuff that's related to that, right? Things that just don't make sense to me. Like I am technically sponsored by Onyx, and the reality is they asked me about it, and I've been using their service for 12 years, and I like it. You know what I mean? And I've talked to their competitors, and their competitors, tried to get me on board, and I have nothing against them, but it's like, dude, I just never used it. Yeah. So you know what I mean? So that's my feeling on it. There's a bunch of companies that I have used their stuff for years. Would I work with them? Yeah, I'd be open to it. But even that I debate, Jay, because the other thing is the stuff always changes. And I have been able to observe, being, as an outfitter, I didn't have as much time to spend on social media and that sort of thing. But I did watch a lot of people grow in this world and become like hunting influencers. And just like from the outward perspective is always waffling on gear. Like, I don't know if they're actually waffling. I don't know if it's financial incentive or it's just that gear changes all the time, So I'm iffy on it. For me personally, it's not like it's never going to be my primary income source. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense for me to transform my YouTube channel into like showing you the next thing that somebody paid me to show you. That's how I view it. I have noticed, and this is just anecdotal, that the people that do go that route, they quit growing. And to me, it's just a demand thing. People are not dumb. They figure it out real quickly. And all of a sudden, the value that those people are giving to folks is less, So that's not really my plan. I don't think anybody who, this is their if their dream is to be the next Cam Hanes or something, I don't think they should be thinking about getting sponsored at all. Yeah. You know what I mean? I think probably they should be trying to get like really good at something, whatever it is, and then help people be good at that. I have found the most immediate feedback from that. And if I was, if I had to, if I lost everything I've built up to this point and I had to just monetize everything I have in terms of social media right now, it would be through like classes or seminars or taking people hunting. Yeah. And I feel like because I focused on, kind of trying to transfer knowledge and show people at least what I've observed over the years, and hopefully it helps them. I think that would work, Does that give you an answer to your question?
No, dude, I couldn't agree with it more. And it's funny. People think because I focus on gear all the time, I'm trying to get people to buy gear. And it's like, no. I'm trying to get you to buy the right piece of gear.
Sure.
Because they've got so many voices clamoring at you from so many angles. And like I just watched a guy I kind of trust and respect change clothing brands 3 times over a year and a
Yeah.
half. And I'm like, do you understand that the people that you told to buy brand X 18 months ago, and then 6 months ago you told to buy brand Y, and now you're telling them to buy brand K, like, even if they don't run out and buy it, you made them feel like shit because but wait a minute, you're my guy. I trust you.
Yeah.
You tell me what to buy. And now you say the thing I bought before is shit. And the new thing, and it's just like, it drives me nuts. Anyways, it's a rant that I've done a bunch on this channel, and I'm not going to get into it again. But I love the thing about not thinking about getting sponsored at all. I think the confusion with these young men and women is that they see sponsorship as a form of validation. Like if brand X puts their stamp on me, then everybody will assume I know what I'm doing. And the message I always try to give is like, it's the same in business. You don't want to go out trying to sell a business. You want people to come to you trying to buy your business, because then you have the negotiating power. And it's the same thing if you do want to, if your goal is to kind of blow up on social media, get yourself so big that the brands that, if you do want to work with the brands you want to work with are coming to you as opposed to you reaching out to them. And I don't think, having sponsored by whoever on your Instagram profile, nobody cares. It doesn't mean you're any better than anybody else. Like, go make your own mark and have your own merit. You know what I mean?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
And it's it's a complicated one, man. And it's ever changing. I think it goes back to a lot of the business dynamics that you've talked about in the hunting world. It's like, how many people are making bino harnesses now?
Dude.
And 10 years ago, there was none. Or there was,
and it's the model.
Jared.
Like, if you want to make money in the hunting industry, you either get sponsored or you go be a guide. And my message, there are other ways. Do you know what I mean? And especially these days, like courses and like, the first question you should be asking yourself is, how can I deliver value to my audience? I'm a big Gary V guy, and his like jab, jab, hook. It's like, you got to give, then ask. Like, I should be over delivering to you so much value that when I finally do ask something back, like buy a membership to my gear review website, that it's like a no-brainer to you because of how much value I've given to you over the years. And if you approach relationships like that, like, I'm always going to make sure I'm giving 51%, I think in the long run, you're going to win. But more people get obsessed with how to give back. Okay, we're running out of time. You've already gone over. I want to take a left-hand turn and ask one selfish question before we log off.
Yeah, go for it, man.
So I'm headed to New Mexico, January 5th, archery mule deer hunt, super southern unit. So we're talking like definitely hills, but like very arid, not a lot of timber, heavily roaded, which is something that's not new. That I'm more of like a backcountry guy. So my competitive advantage of being able to like head off into nowhere does me zero good in this particular unit. So I have a general kind of game plan, got a little bit of intel on the unit, going to primarily like truck camp, get up high, try to glass. I'm going to be in the rut. It's archery. Now, instead of just asking for like some vague, like, how would you go about this hunt? What are maybe like the top 1 or 2 either things that you think people should be thinking about on a hunt like this that would help lead to success? Or what are like 1 or 2 mistakes people tend to make on a hunt like this that I should be looking at avoiding?
Yeah. So one question I have first, Jay, is because I'm not familiar with the area. It is the rut down there for them?
It is the rut.
Yeah.
Like peak rut. So this is the late archery tag, and they will be rutting. Yep.
Yeah. So I would say that, and it was a mistake that I committed a bunch of times over the years, and even when I knew better, and that's that when mule deer start rutting, you cannot depend on them being with the same set of does or in the same location again. Okay. So when you're particularly with a bow, if you have an opportunity, even if it's marginal and you only have X amount of time before dark, you've got to do, if that's a deer that you want to shoot, you got to do it right now. Okay. That would be, I would say, that's cost cost me harvesting a lot of deer with people just not pushing it. There's, I guess what I would say is there's no downside to pushing it, right?
Okay.
Because you have to assume that the chance of that deer being with the same does the next day are pretty slim. They bounce from set of does to set of does. And even if they get a hot doe, a lot of times they'll run that doe, off by themselves, or they'll push it into another group of does. So you have to be cognizant of that in terms of, hunting rutting mule deer. And the other thing is like, if you're glassing heavy and you're covering a bunch of ground, is two things. One, just like when you first get there, any location during the rut, I tell people just go try to locate as many localized pockets as does as possible and mark them all. Don't forget it. And it's easy to forget about like one group you saw on the first day. You want to kind of mark them all on, whatever software you're using. And then you want to just keep iterating on that and check them over and over and over again. And eventually a buck's going to show up with those does. So having that knowledge and really, taking notes on it is huge, because you'll go back to those spots. It's really easy to forget like some pocket of does that you saw the first day. And then by the time you get back there, magically a buck has showed up. The other thing that I tell you, man, is when you're glassing those pockets of does, use the mannerisms of the does to your advantage. I like so many mule deer, I have known there was a buck, like, because sometimes
right
in this country, like it won't be real rugged, and there'll be like a knoll that goes back, right? And there's a couple does back in there you don't see, and then there's 5 does on the face. Even from a couple hundred yards, the mannerisms of the does on the face will be different if there's a buck rutting does behind them. And if you, I mean, that's just one example, but in general, if you're really keyed in to what the does are doing, they just perk up if there's bucks around, even from a long ways away. I can't tell you how many times, because mule deer sometimes will literally run from one set of does, and they know exactly where the next pocket of does are, and they'll run across the wide ass open right across sagebrush or whatever. And a lot of times a doe will tell you they're coming before you can see the deer from like 300-400 yards, and they may like mosey along. So if you've got a bow and you're like, all right, like these deer are nervous for a reason, you can technically start moving in there before you even see the buck. I don't know what kind of, if it's just, shoot a legal buck type of situation or whatever, but if it is that case, then use that to your advantage and be like, there's got to be, these does are acting nervous. They're not just relaxing, eating. There's a buck around there. I'm going to go over there and see what's going on. Does that help?
That's fantastic advice, man. And it's funny, it's a decent enough deer unit, but it's not like a trophy unit. And I've heard the numbers are down slightly, so I'm going to be pretty aggressive about the hunt. Like I'm not.
Well, killing one with a bow is a phenomenal accomplishment, man. They're not dumb.
No, 100%. I'm excited. The Southwest is probably my favorite place to hunt. I think because it's so different from home. Like it's like the polar opposite of British Columbia. Dude, I can't thank you enough. And for everybody listening who put in questions, I will bug Cliff to come back on in a few months.
Yeah, we'll do it again.
We'll do the Q&A for sure. This was super interesting to me, so thank you very much for taking the time. While we close out, what do you got going on? Where should people follow you, and anything you kind of want to plug or shout out?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest things right now on my YouTube, it's just Cliff Gray, my name, CliffGray. If you just put that in the search bar on YouTube, it'll pop up. And then my Instagram, CliffGry. I do have a newsletter that people can sign up for. It's at pursuitwithcliff.com. That's pretty much it.
Awesome, man. I'll put all that stuff in the show notes. So for anybody listening, just check the show notes and you can click on all those links. Thanks again, man. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, of course. Thank you, man.
All right. Cheers.